Okay, quick one, because while I was making all the other videos, I realized that the one thing I haven't mentioned at all is undoing stuff, which is, I guess, quite important. Probably just because we're so used to it, it's so ubiquitous, I just kind of forgot to think about it. There's not much really to say, but Zbrush has a couple of interesting things on the topic of undoing stuff. So if here's a blank canvas, if I make a squiggle, 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 that's 3, and I hit Control Z, it will undo them one at a time. Pretty standard stuff. Excuse me. But if I, 4, 5, let's do a little clock, 6, if you watch this orange bar at the top, you'll see that every time I make a stroke, it jumps across to the right. So there's a number of little steps here, and it'll tell me the time and date and the number of the step out of the number of steps I've done. So I've done 12 strokes, this is number 7, and this will increase the more strokes you do. So it's like a kind of visual timeline of what's going on. I'll show you why that's kind of useful in a moment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh dear, I accidentally wrote the word bum on my canvas. That's no good. I wanted a clock, and now I've suddenly realized that somewhere back here I have written the word bum, and I need to get rid of that. So I can do Control Z and start going back that way, but I can also use this timeline to click into, where did I actually write the word bum? Oh look, I've done 8 there, 7 there, 6. I can click back to wherever I was in the timeline that I did this, and it'll give me the time that I actually made that particular error, and then I could just start drawing again. 9, 10, 11, 12. It's a good clock, isn't it? So I can use this line to quickly jump backwards. Trevor, whoever Trevor is. Back through my undos and just carry on sculpting if there's something I don't like. What you will find, the more you sculpt, the longer this gets, and it becomes, I mean, I regularly end up with 6,000 or 7,000 undo steps, so picking an individual one out is quite awkward. So it's not something, once I get past a certain point in the sculpting, it's not something I use all the time, but you can also go up to edit, undo and redo, so you can do it that way if you like, but the timeline is quite a handy visual way of doing it. What you can do is delete either your full undo history or your older undo history. So if I get to a point, this clock is nice. Okay, right. I'm happy with that. I want to move on, but I don't want to make this Zbrush file too big. I mean, my Zbrush files come in at, there might be 2 or 3 gigabytes. If it's a really long job, and I don't necessarily want all of the undo history. I want to keep it manageable. I want to be able to hop in and out and find where things have gone wrong. But if I get to a point and I'm happy, I can go up to edit and I can do delete older undo history. So it takes me back to square one. So now it keeps doing this today. What is going on? It really doesn't like me. Normally, for some reason, it doesn't like having its undo history cleared. Today, we'll research that. Go away. Let's go back into something else. Let's try one of these. So basically what it means is you can keep a kind of running undo history of as many steps as you like. So rather than being restricted to a particular number of undo steps, like 10 or 11 or whatever it is, you can, maybe in the early days of the model you want to keep quite a few undo steps while you figure out what's going on. But as you get further up, you might not want as many. So what's kind of cool is you can say, right, well, I got to that point and I'm happy with that, so I'm gonna undo that, delete that older history, but I've still got all of this. Look, all this stuff that I've done since. So I've got a number of undo steps. It's not unmanageable, and I can kind of clear as I go, and I can decide when to do that rather than being stuck with 10 undo steps. Which, if you're anything like me, you can find you fiddle around and suddenly you've used all your undo steps, and actually you want to go back and fix something over here that you did earlier, but you've since done a little bit of tweaking and a little bit of tweaking here, and you've put the cursor down 9 or 10 times and you're stuffed, and then you can only undo up to a certain point, and then you're kind of stuck. With the being able to delete portions of your undo history and not be restricted by how many steps you kind of cut out of that, it means you could do it in sort of common sense stages. So like if you're blocking out, I've done my blocking out, I'm kind of happy with it, I don't really need to keep all the stages of my blocking out. I can delete all of those, and then I can go on, and I might keep 50 undo steps when I'm doing the detail. I might keep 100, I might keep 1,000, doesn't really matter. I can delete them as I go when it suits me, rather than when the software says, oh, you've reached your 10 points, tough, you're stuffed. So it's quite handy in that respect. It doesn't do it, it is pretty standard stuff, but this little timeline, if you're certainly, as you get into grips with it, it's quite handy to be able to flip backwards and forwards. Something I find it very useful for is, for whatever reason, I have a ongoing bug with Zbrush, where particularly if I'm doing very, very small strokes, I wonder if I can get it to do it today. No, today is not going to do it. Sometimes I get a problem where Zbrush sort of jumps out on a sort of 45-degree angle. So I'll make a stroke and it'll just go zoink straight off the edge of the canvas. And I'll go through phases where it will do that, like every other stroke. And sometimes if I'm doing really, really fine detail, I don't notice until I move the model around, and then I can just see this kind of the light catching this angular line going across the model. I've been on so many forums trying to find out what it is and how to stop it. So it might be, it might be like that, and I don't really notice until I'm moving the model, and I think, oh shit, look, I've got this. And that's where the sort of selective undo, the undo timeline becomes really useful, because I can hop back to a point where that, because I might have been doing this, if I'm doing hair or fur or something, or some sort of textured background, leaves, and all the kind of stuff you spend ages doing, and I'll do all these little strokes, and then one of them will jump off like that, and because they're light strokes, they don't kind of show up very much. So it's really kind of handy for that. The other thing you can do with it is, I think go all the way back to the beginning. So obviously the longer your undo timeline, the more your computer has to think about getting it back to the beginning. I can go up to the movie menu, and I can make a movie out of my undo history, which is really nice for making timelines. If you have a look on some of the other videos on my website, you'll see there's a number of sort of time-lapse ZBrush sculpts, and it's all done by just keeping the undo history and making a little movie out of it using the movie menu. And they can be quite cool. They're quite funky. What it does do though, it also records the movement of the model, so it can make you quite queasy if you're somebody who moves the model around quite a lot. Let's stop that because we don't need that. So that is undoing in ZBrush. Pretty much the same as every other piece of software you used, but with the addition of this nifty little timeline, which means you can keep your undo sort of parameters. You can operate it in a common sense way rather than being dictated to by the software and the undo steps. I hope that is useful.